The Crimson Den hummed with the kind of energy that made Elias instantly regret his choices. The neon-lit pleasure station reeked of power, sweat, and very questionable alien beverages. Warriors from across the galaxy lounged on bio couches, some sharpening blades, others whispering over scandalous wagers. In the center of it all, atop a throne of bones and shimmering metals, sat the one person Elias shouldn't have locked eyes with. Zavira. Her name alone sent entire species into silence. She was massive, at least 7 feet tall, lean muscle coiled under battle-worn armor. 2 curling horns framed her sharp, violet eyes, and a jagged scar cut across her lip, evidence that someone, somewhere, had tried and failed to make her bleed. Elias, being a certified idiot, smirked at her. "Hey, Warlord lady, I hear you like a good bet." Silence fell across the room. A reptilian brute in the corner choked on his drink. Zavira exhaled slowly, tilting her head as if debating whether to crush him instantly or let him entertain her first. "You are bold, human," she murmured, voice like crushed velvet over steel. "What could a fragile creature like you possibly wager against me?" He jabbed a thumb toward the caged cell on the side of the room. Juno, his smuggler friend, glared at him from behind the glowing force field, her hands tied. "I want her back." Laughter rippled through the den. Someone slapped a tentacled appendage on the table, wheezing. "You wish to challenge me for a prisoner?" Zavira leaned forward, amused. "Do you have a death wish?" Elias kept his grin steady. "Depends on the game." Zavira's eyes flickered with something dangerous. She flicked her fingers. A small, hover drone zipped forward, projecting a list of traditional Warlord gambling games. Most involved limb removal, poisonous drinks, or brutal gladiatorial fights. Elias barely managed not to gulp. "I choose one-on-one combat," he bluffed. The laughter redoubled. Zavira chuckled low. "Oh, human, your kind is weak. If I were to fight you, I might snap you in half just by patting your back." "Yeah, well, maybe I'm more durable than I look." That made her pause. The amusement in her gaze sharpened into something else, interest, curiosity. "And if you lose?" Elias hesitated. "Name your price." Zavira leaned back, assessing him like a cat studying a particularly amusing rodent. Then she smiled, and the room tensed. "If you fail, you become mine," she purred. Elias blinked. "Define mine." A low chuckle. "Body. Mind. Service. Everything. You will be my possession, my entertainment, my—" She trailed her fingers down the armrest. "Personal plaything." His brain short-circuited. He glanced at Juno, who violently shook her head behind the bars, mouthing, "What are you doing?" Elias turned back to Zavira. He was stuck between saving his friend and potentially getting himself into a situation that required endurance. "Well, no going back now." "Deal." The den exploded with cheers, bets being placed. A reptilian dealer slammed a hand on the table, shouting, "The challenge has been set. The human bets his very being against the Warlord's favor. Let the game begin." Zavira stood, stretching like a predator who had just been given permission to play with her food. "You amuse me, human," she purred. "I accept." Elias had exactly 5 seconds before he realized something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. "Wait," he started. "What exactly is the challenge?" Zavira's smirk widened. "A test of stamina." His stomach dropped. "Stamina?" She stepped closer, towering over him. "You wagered yourself against my satisfaction. And I, little human, intend to collect." The room erupted in laughter. Some aliens howled. Others gasped. A squid-faced gambler fainted on the spot. Juno, still trapped in the cage, slapped her forehead. "You absolute moron!" Elias finally put the pieces together. Oh no. Elias barely had time to process his mistake before 2 massive enforcers grabbed him, hauling him through an archway into a private chamber. The doors slid shut behind him with an ominous hiss. The room was dimly lit, casting deep shadows over the alien artifacts lining the walls. Some looked ceremonial. Others looked functional. The kind of functional that made his stomach twist. Zavira leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, watching him with amusement. "You're tense, human," she noted. Elias gave a strained chuckle. "Yeah, well, it's been a long day." She prowled closer, the heat of her gaze making his skin prickle. "You wagered your body. Your endurance. Were you lying about your abilities?" Elias straightened. "Hey, humans have plenty of endurance. We're known for it." Zavira's lips curled. "Are you?" Before he could respond, she clapped her hands. A panel slid open, revealing an array of bizarre alien objects. Some looked like oversized tuning forks. Others resembled instruments of war, or worse, pleasure. Elias squinted. I'm not familiar with these models." Zavira smirked. "They are tests. Challenges of resilience. Surely a human of your supposed endurance can withstand them?" This was bad. This was very bad. Zavira reached for a glowing, serpentine device and pressed something on its side. It hummed, shifting like a living thing. Elias took a step back. "Look, before we get into any testing, maybe we should." She pressed the device to his chest. Instantly, a wave of heat surged through his body. His muscles tensed, his vision blurred for a second. It wasn't pain. Not exactly. It was stimuli overload, like being dunked in cold water and set on fire at the same time. Elias yelped. Zavira laughed, withdrawing the device. "Too much?" He coughed, shaking it off. "Pfft. Please. I've had spicier food than that." Zavira arched a brow. "Impressive." She set the device aside and grabbed something else. This one looked like a hollow breathing tube made of shimmering glass. She handed it to him. "Put this in your mouth." Elias choked. Excuse me?" Zavira tilted her head. "It simulates the breathing bond. If you cannot sustain the exchange, you will fail." "Oh. Right. Alien customs." Definitely not what he thought. Still, he was not about to back out now. Not after everything. He grabbed the tube and put it between his lips. Instantly, a thick, warm mist flooded his mouth. It tasted sweet. Strange. Like cinnamon and static electricity. His lungs burned. Zavira watched him intently. "Steady. Do not break the exchange." Elias focused, trying to control his breathing. The mist was thicker than air, heavier. His body screamed at him to cough, to exhale, to stop. He lasted 5 seconds before he choked, doubling over. Zavira barked a laugh. "Pathetic." Elias wheezed. "You breathe this stuff? It strengthens bonds between mates," she said smoothly. "Your body must adjust to it." Elias wiped his mouth, glaring. "Maybe humans just have more efficient respiratory systems." She grinned. "Or weaker ones." Oh, it was on. He snatched the tube, jammed it back between his lips, and inhaled deeply. His lungs protested. His head swam. Everything blurred for a second. Zavira's gaze darkened. "Interesting," she murmured. Elias swayed slightly, gripping the nearby table. His vision refocused just in time to see Zavira grab something new. It looked like a small metallic orb. She tossed it to him. "Hold it." Elias caught it. "That's it." Zavira smirked. "If you can." The moment his fingers closed around it, it vibrated violently. Elias yelped, nearly dropping it. His arms shook, every muscle seizing. It wasn't painful, just overwhelming. "Steady," Zavira said, watching him with an almost predatory gleam. Elias gritted his teeth, adjusting his grip. His fingers tingled. His wrists buzzed. Every nerve in his body felt like it was being activated at once. Zavira circled him, arms folded. "Is this too much, human?" He swallowed. "Pfft. Please. I've handled worse." "Have you?" She turned a dial. The vibrations doubled. Elias let out a strangled noise. Zavira laughed. He clenched his jaw, refusing to drop it. His pride was on the line. His dignity was on the line. He could feel every muscle in his body tense. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Zavira leaned in, smirking. Most species cannot last more than 10 seconds. Elias exhaled sharply, gripping the orb tighter. Yeah? Well, most species don't have human stubbornness. Zavira watched, intrigued. Perhaps you do have potential, she murmured. Elias' arms were shaking. His fingers ached. His brain was screaming. But he held on. 10 seconds. 15. Zavira's amusement shifted into interest. 20. Finally, she tapped a control panel, deactivating the orb. Elias' entire body went limp. He nearly collapsed. Zavira caught his chin, tilting his face up to hers. Not bad, she mused. Elias gasped, shaking out his hands. Not bad? That was. She chuckled. You lasted longer than expected. Elias opened his mouth to retort, then realized exactly what she'd said. His face flushed. Zavira grinned. He scowled. You're doing that on purpose. Perhaps. He groaned, rubbing his face. Zavira studied him for a long moment, then stepped back. Enough for today. Rest, human. The real challenge begins soon. Elias froze. Wait. That wasn't the real challenge? Zavira smirked. Oh no. She turned, walking toward the exit. That was just warm up. The door sealed shut. Elias stood there, arms still tingling, lungs still burning, brain still catching up. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he muttered. I'm so screwed. Elias sat on the edge of a strangely soft alien couch, flexing his fingers and trying not to think about how every nerve in his body still tingled from whatever bizarre test that had been. His lungs still carried traces of that thick, electric mist, and every inhale felt like he was breathing in the aftershock of a lightning strike. He wasn't sure how much time had passed before Zavira returned, but it wasn't enough. The doors slid open, and she strode in like she owned not just the room but the entire concept of existence itself. She studied him for a long moment before letting out a soft hum. Still intact. Impressive. Elias rolled his shoulders, forcing himself to act like he wasn't 2 seconds from collapsing. Told you. Humans are built different. Zavira stepped closer, tilting her head. Are they? She circled him, her presence unnervingly intense. Her sharp eyes flicked over his posture, his sweat-dampened skin, the way his fingers still twitched slightly from the earlier challenge. Elias cleared his throat. So, round 2? Zavira smirked. Curious. Most would be begging for mercy by now. Yeah, well, I've had worse. He had not. She leaned in slightly, and the air shifted between them. Tell me, human, she mused, her voice taking on a lazy, teasing edge. Are all males of your kind so resistant? Elias tensed. He knew that tone. That was the universal voice of someone who had just decided something was worth further investigation. He swallowed. Yeah. Definitely. We're known for our endurance. Zavira smirked. Endurance. Something about the way she said it made his brain short-circuit. She suddenly reached out, pressing her palm flat against his chest. Elias flinched. Not because it hurt, but because her touch sent a ripple of heat through his entire body. Your heart is fast, she noted, fingers trailing slightly. You humans have a peculiar reaction to pressure. Elias locked every muscle in his body to keep from visibly shuddering. Yeah, well, we, adapt. Zavira's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Do you? Before he could process whatever was happening, she turned, walking toward a panel on the wall. Then let's put that to the test. The panel slid open, revealing music. Or at least, something that sounded like music if someone had thrown bass-heavy tribal drums into a blender and added the occasional ominous hum of a starship reactor. Elias blinked. What exactly are we testing here? Zavira gestured toward the open floor space. You spoke of human adaptability. Now prove it. His stomach sank. Prove it, how? She smirked. Dance. Elias stared. Zavira arched a brow. You did wager yourself, did you not? He absolutely had. Elias exhaled through his nose. Fine. He could do this. He could absolutely do this. Squaring his shoulders, he stepped forward, rolling his neck like he had any business attempting this level of confidence. All right, he muttered. You want human adaptability? You got it. The beat shifted, a low, pulsing rhythm thrumming through the room. Elias moved. Sort of. To his credit, he was trying. He went for something between a casual two-step and a body roll that probably looked smoother in his head. Zavira watched, arms crossed. Elias kept going, adding a little more movement, a little more energy, a lot more self-delusion. At some point, he tried a spin. He nearly ate the floor. Zavira laughed. He caught himself at the last second, straightening up like nothing had happened. That was intentional. He lied. Zavira's smirk deepened. Was it? Elias pointed a finger at her. Listen. Humans have many forms of dance. Some are subtle. Some are complex. Some are instinctual. She tilted her head. And this is, which? Elias hesitated. Then, in a moment of sheer, unfiltered desperation, he went for the only dance move guaranteed to get a reaction. He twerked. Zavira froze. The beat dropped. Elias committed. Zavira's entire demeanor changed. For a long, painfully long moment, she just stared. Elias wasn't sure what reaction he was expecting, but he was not prepared for her eyes to darken like that. Fascinating, she murmured. Elias stopped immediately. Zavira stepped forward, inspecting him like some rare, exotic discovery. Is this a ritual of your people? Elias coughed. Sort of. She folded her arms, watching him intently. Show me again. His soul left his body. That might not be necessary. He tried. Zavira just grinned. Do it. He stared at her. She stared back. A standoff. Elias knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he did that again, he was never getting out of here. But if he didn't... He clenched his jaw. This was a trap. He could see it in her eyes. If he danced again, she was going to take it as a challenge. His entire survival depended on what he did next. So, naturally, he bluffed. He squared his shoulders, exhaled, and gave the most confident smirk he could muster. Maybe next time, he said smoothly. Wouldn't want to overwhelm you. Zavira narrowed her eyes. Then, to his absolute horror, she smirked back. Very well, she murmured. For now. Elias forced himself not to collapse. He had dodged a bullet. For now. Elias had barely caught his breath when Zavira turned away, walking toward a panel embedded in the wall. The motion activated some kind of holographic display, scrolling through symbols he didn't recognize. He didn't need to. The moment she smirked, he knew it was bad. You lasted longer than expected, she mused. Perhaps your kind has more value than I thought. Elias wiped his forehead. Glad to hear it. So, about that deal. Zavira tapped the panel. A low hum vibrated through the room. The floor shifted slightly beneath him. He immediately did not like that. Wait, he said slowly. What was that? Zavira grinned. The final trial. His stomach dropped. Final? You wagered your body, she reminded him. And you have yet to prove its worth. His very soul screamed. I feel like I've proven plenty. She took a slow step forward. Do not falter now, human. You've come so far. His brain scrambled for solutions. He needed a way out. Something. Anything. Then, he had it. Elias straightened, forcing confidence into his posture. All right, he said. But if we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Zavira arched a brow. Oh? You're underestimating humans, he bluffed. We don't just survive challenges. We master them. Her expression flickered with intrigue. We have techniques, he continued, voice smooth. Ancient methods passed down through generations. But, he exhaled dramatically, only those worthy can experience them. Zavira studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she grinned. Show me. Elias' internal alarm screamed. He needed to sell this. If he hesitated, if he wavered for even a second, she'd see through him. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then, with every ounce of fake confidence in his body, he raised his hands and began the most ridiculous, exaggerated series of hand motions imaginable. Zavira's eyes gleamed. This is the technique? Elias nodded. It requires precision, control, mastery of one's inner self. She leaned in. Fascinating, she murmured. Elias forced himself to keep going. He weaved his hands through the air, fingers flexing in strange, elaborate motions. He spun once for effect. Zavira's entire focus was locked on him. And then, he bolted. Elias lunged toward the exit, hand slamming against the control panel. Zavira reacted instantly, but he had the element of surprise. The doors slid open and he ran. Behind him, Zavira let out a sharp, delighted laugh. You clever little. He didn't wait for the rest. He sprinted through the corridors, heart pounding. He had seconds before she recovered. Juno's cell was just ahead. Elias? Juno gaped at him through the bars. What the hell took you so long? Not now! He slammed a fist against the release panel. The force field fizzled out. Juno bolted out. What did you do? Bad decisions, mostly. Figures. Heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Juno swore. She's coming, isn't she? Elias yanked her forward. Run first, complain later. They booked it through the pleasure station, dodging stunned onlookers. The exit was in sight. Then a massive shadow loomed behind them. Zavira was right there. Elias did the only thing he could. He dove for a lever and pulled. The emergency lock slammed down. A thick barrier sealed the corridor behind them. Elias and Juno burst through the docking bay doors. Their ship was prepped and waiting. Juno practically threw herself into the cockpit. We are never coming back here! Elias scrambled into the co-pilot's seat, slamming the launch sequence. Through the viewport, Zavira stood on the other side of the barrier, watching them. Then, to his absolute horror, she grinned. As the ship blasted away, Juno glared at him. What did you do? Elias stared at the rapidly shrinking station, mind spinning. Then, slowly, he exhaled. I think I just won a warlord's heart.